When it comes to identities like being LGBT, or when I first got my ADHD and autism diagnosis and I was in the middle of my PhD, I went through and I was working on a pedagogy of the full self, and I refused to leave parts of myself at home for the comfort of other people.
Mhm.
And that's a beautiful freaking phase,
Mhm.
right? It's beautiful for me, even if it's difficult for people who don't want me to be my full self.
Mhm.
Rather, I leave parts of myself at home. Welcome, everybody, to the Affirming Practice Podcast. Today's episode, we are talking about what a beautiful phase, because phases can be complex, messy, temporary, permanent, but they are always real and they are beautiful, even when they are chaos. Today's episode is inspired by those of us who have been told who we are as a phase, as though it's bad to have phases at all. To be clear, telling people who they are is not your, or who they are as a phase is not your place. I need to re-say that one. To be clear, telling people who they are is a phase is not your place. Introduction to our hosts. Hi, I'm Casey Brimmer. I use they, them pronouns. I am an artist, activist, and educator on LGBT issues, disability, intersectionality, identity, all of the things coming together. And I have been for more than 20 years. And this is my wonderful co host.
I'm Bob. Ierien. I am a pastor and have been for over 20 years. I use he, him pronouns. And I am a person who cares a lot about communities that nurture and support people, particularly marginalized people, and help them not just to survive, but to thrive. And so this work is very near and dear to my heart.
Feel that. So, surprise ish question for you, Bob. What phase are you in? I'm going to give an example. Right now, I'm in a tear it all down, question everything, and restructure phase.
Hmm. I'm probably in a phase that could be described as, well, it depends on what area of my life you're talking about. Because certainly in some parts of my life, I am definitely in a tear it all down and build something new phase. Certainly with respect to organized religion. In other parts of my life, I am in a torches and pitchforks phase. You know, I really didn't think we were going to be having a discussion in the year of our Lord 2026 about why fascism is bad, but apparently some people didn't get that memo.
I would
And partly I am in a phase of, I guess the G-rated way to say it would be radical self-acceptance.
I'll take it. Radical self-acceptance, radical self-affirmation, maybe. We working
Yeah,
towards it?
well, working towards it.
We'll take
Um,
it.
that, I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin most days. I like the guy that looks at me from the mirror when I shave in the morning. And I'm coming to a place of affirming other people's right to not like the guy that looks at me in the mirror when I shave. And their opinion of me is none of my business. And I don't have to give a fat rat's fanny about it.
There. So, vaguely related question. What's a phase you've been through and what did you learn from it? And so I'm going to give you a second to think about that. And I'm going to answer this question with what's on my shirt. So, my shirt, which y'all can't see the full thing of, says ex gay therapy made me gayer. And the phase that I was going through was believing that I could pray away the gay or use therapy to get away the gay. those things don't work. And I came out on the other side of that, probably gayer and more radical and more willing to argue that conversion therapy is wrong for everyone, including myself. Um, and I learned that who I am, whether it's a phase or not, is important. And no one else should be telling me, well, you can't be that, or you shouldn't want to be that. So that's mine.
A phase that I have been through and what I learned from that. I guess I would say I went through a phase early on in ministry that I think a lot of clergy go through, where you know, being a pastor really becomes part of your identity. But there's also the thing of like, okay, but what does that mean for me, right? And how do I, incorporate that identity and what have you? And I definitely went through a phase where uh, my vocation was almost my entire identity.
Yeah.
And it damn near killed me. And when I crashed out and had to go on leave from ministry for an extended period just to heal, then it became not just a vocational crisis, but an identity crisis. Like, who am I if I am not a pastor?
Yeah.
And what I learned from that is, yeah, my vocation is part of my identity. And it is today, it's a big part of my identity, but it's not the bulk of my identity. And it's not my
Yeah.
only identity. And as much as I love what I do and I feel like I'm called to do what I do, um, it's not my only calling. And some days it's not even my primary calling.
Yeah.
That one of the things that I learned is that there's got to be some give and take. There have to be times when, my calling to be a husband or my calling to be a dad needs to be primary.
Yeah. Yeah. That balance. That balance is important in a lot of aspects of who we are and what we do. There are a lot of folks when they first come out who are just like, everything about me is gay. I was that person. I wore a rainbow cape every day for 6 months because my belief was if people were targeting me and I was making myself a visible target, they weren't targeting the other queers who weren't as brave,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a whole thing, but people really were like, oh, that's that gay person at school. And I was like, yes, I am.
Right.
And
And,
so balance.
well, and there is some power in that, in claiming that identity and saying, this is who I am. And yeah, and you know what? Not only is this who I am, I'm proud that this is who I am, and I don't have to hide it, which is
Yeah.
like why we have pride, right? Like that's
Oh,
why pride matters. Um, I and I think yes, balance is a thing, but the more I live with this idea of these multiple identities and what have you, I don't really think of it in terms of balance as much as I think of it in terms of needfulness. Like, which one of these identities needs more of my attention and more of my energy and more of my self today, right?
yeah.
Um, because like balance kind of sounds like there's some equilibrium goal that like we're going to get to a place where like work-life balance, right? Well, here's the thing about work-life balance. There are weeks when I have no work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
Like Holy Week, I have a work balance, period. Like, and that's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And And as clergy, we all know that that's the way it is, right? Now, conversely, there also need to be weeks where my work balance is, you know, 10% instead of 90%.
I think that's
And,
what I was getting at. Yeah.
right. And that there's a dynamism in it. And I get completely what you were saying about balance. And I just I'm aware that for me, for a long time, I thought of balance as, okay, I got to get everything to like 50-50, or, if it's three things like 33, 33, 33, or whatever. And that was always self-defeating for me
Yeah. Yeah.
because I was chasing a sweet spot that I couldn't get to. And if I could get to it, I couldn't maintain it. And for me now, it's much more life-giving to just like relax and say, yeah, this is a week where I'm, hitting it hammer and tongs at work because that's what needs to happen. Um, you know, I have two people in the hospital and a funeral to plan this week, and like to care for these people, which is my responsibility. I'm going to be, hitting the ground running all week. And the flip side of that is when there's a week when there's nothing going on, it's okay if I check out and go home.
Yeah. So when I said balance, I think I like what you're saying here, where it doesn't have to be 50-50. Sometimes it is 70-30. For me, I went full force. Being queer is 100% of my identity, 100% of the time
Right.
for 6 months. And for me, finding balance was realizing A, I don't have to make myself a target, and B, that I could also be an artist and an activist. Like, so if being gay 100% of the time was like partially me being an activist, it was also me being like, I could be an artist and an activist and an educator and someone who likes to read and all of these things at once, and finding the intersectional me within
Right.
myself rather than being 100% one thing all of the time.
Right. And so feel free to correct me because I'm kind of like spinning out the implications of this in my own head. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking like, okay, so a person who likes to read, even as you are a person who likes to read, yes, you are still a gay person who likes to read. But that doesn't mean that everything you read has to be, gay liberation theory. Like you can
Yeah.
sit down and read, I don't know, Chilton's auto repair manual for a 72 Chevy pickup if you want to, and still be a person who likes to read, who also happens to be gay. And,
Yeah. So n- not every book I read has to have gay characters. Is it a
right.
perk? Yes. Not every book I need to read needs to be written by a queer author. Is it a perk? Yes. Not everything I read needs to be written by a disabled author or include disabled characters if I'm reading fiction. Not everything I read needs to be theoretical. Not everything I read needs to be actually in front of me to be read. I do a lot of audiobooks now that I've had the brain injury and it's messed with
Mm-hmm.
my eyes. And so it's it is what you're saying here. Like for me, the balance is I can be queer and this other thing. And yes, queerness informs this other thing, but this other thing stands apart from queerness too.
And informs all of the other parts of your life.
Exactly. And we're never just one thing. We did the episode on intersectionality. We're always multiple things at once.
Right.
For
We're a
today's episode,
cake.
we're a cake. Uh, for today's episode, I want to start with this. We all have phases to our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could think of that as infant, toddler, terrible twos, child, tween, teenager, adult, midlife, quote, women of a certain age, which is something I heard the other day. And I was like, I have questions. We have phases of questioning everything and of questioning specific things like religion or power systems, and where we don't ask questions at all. We have phases and styles. Taylor Swift calls hers eras. I'm
Mm-hmm.
throwing that out there. And we also have different phases to how we understand who we are, whether that be our gender, our sexuality, our race, our disabilities, whatever. We have different phases to our existence, no matter who we are. And something being a phase isn't inherently good or inherently bad. It sort of just is. A common TV trope is someone in an LGBT person's life saying, it's just a phase. So what? So
Mhm.
damn what? It's a phase, okay?
And when you asked the question a few minutes ago about what phase am I in now, or what's a phase that I've been through and what did I learn from it, I my brain immediately went to Taylor Swift and eras, because I have an offspring who is a hardcore Swiftie, and so I've learned that lingo. But yeah, everybody has phases, and it doesn't mean that those phases are any more or less genuine. Who I am now is very different than who I was 20 years ago, and that doesn't mean that who I was 20 years ago was any less real. Um, you know, 25 years ago, being a pastor was not remotely part of my identity. Being a naval officer was a huge part of my identity,
Yeah.
and it was as real as it gets. And today I may go for a couple of weeks without thinking about my identity as a former naval officer, and I think about being a pastor every day. It doesn't make it any more or less valid or real. It's just a different point in my life. And you know everybody has this. Like, you look at, this is why I think the Taylor Swift example is so great. I'm from a slightly different musical metaphor and a slightly different era. Willie Nelson, before he and his compadres, Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, got sick and tired of Nashville and, moved to the Texas Hill Country and, went outlaw. Um, Willie Nelson was kind of like country music establishment songwriter. He wrote a lot of what in the day were considered mainstream pop country songs, and they were fantastic songs, right? And they're still classics for a reason, and it doesn't make them any more or less valid or real than, Whiskey River Take My Mind being played on Austin City Limits by a guy with ponytails, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I feel that. I love that you took that example further. And it makes me think of like the musical phases I have been in, but that is a whole other story. I think one of the questions I want to broach here is why do you think people paint phases like they're a bad thing?
my personal opinion is life is really, really complex
Yeah.
and complicated and in some ways hard. And it seems to be getting more so all the time. And that complexity is sometimes overwhelming for people.
Yeah.
And we like black and white stories, right? We like things that are sort of nailed down and like stable and like, oh, this is just how it is, and like reliable, right? There's like that running joke about people who lose their shit if you walk into the grocery store and they've changed where the way the grocery store is arranged. I walked into my favorite big box home improvement store about 2 weeks ago, and they didn't move it. They just completely reoriented the layout of the tool section, which is like my happy place. And I'm not going to lie, it threw me for a loop for a few minutes. Now, I've been through enough change in my life that it didn't send me into a tailspin, but I think some people are just so overwhelmed that they don't have spoons, so to speak, to try to process that kind of change. I also think a lot of people don't have that kind of self-reflective insight to recognize their own phases and the changes that they've been through in their own self-understanding over a lifetime. They like to think that they're the same person they've always been. If they are, how sad, you know. But a lot of times people like to claim, well, I'm just the same old me and whatever. And no, you're not. I guarantee you, when I sit down and I talk with a group of men in their 70s, I had breakfast with 6 guys in their 70s this morning. And I am absolutely convinced that none of those guys is the same person he was 30 years ago. Um, I sure hope not, because if you've gone through 30 years of life and you haven't grown or changed at all, you've wasted 30 years. But I do think that the thing about phases, some of it is, we like simple stories. Like we like the character who is the good guy and the character who's the bad guy, and we like the good guy to wear a white hat and the bad guy to wear a black hat so that we can identify them on sight. I mean, there's a reason that old school Western movies did it that way, right? The
Yeah.
sheriff always wore a white hat and the villain wore a black hat on purpose. So we like that because it's simple and it's easy.
But people aren't simple and easy. We're
Right.
complex and inherently complex.
Mm-hmm.
And phases phases are as real to our existence and as integral to our existence as, for example, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly.
Right.
We There are phases to our lives, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we can't anticipate them. Okay, I'm in my 30s. That's mostly anticipatable, assuming I didn't die. I made it to my 30s. Well, eventually I'll hopefully hit my 40s, and that will be a different like phase.
Right.
When it comes to identities like being LGBT, or when I first got my ADHD and autism diagnosis and I was in the middle of my PhD, I went through and I was working on a pedagogy of the full self, and I refused to leave parts of myself at home for the comfort of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful freaking phase,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's beautiful for me, even if it's difficult for people who don't want me to be my full self.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, I leave parts of myself at home.
But see, for those folks, it's not such a beautiful phase.
Yeah. And it's not a beautiful phase because I'm not fitting the trope or the idea they have of what I should be.
You're making them work.
I'm making them work not only to think through possibilities, but to at minimum accept or tolerate me. And at best, affirm, nurture, support,
Right.
which is this is why we have this podcast, which is a whole phase in both of our lives right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
a it may not last forever, but it's lasting right now. And I know that this will be our 11th episode, and 11 episodes in, am I wouldn't say drastically different, but I think I have a new level of confidence from this phase
Mm-hmm.
of what we are doing and
Mm-hmm.
this phase in my life.
Right. And you know, and you and I have talked about this sort of offline before about we live in a heterosexist, heteronormative society, right?
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as cis privilege and hetero privilege. And part of that privilege is that if you are a cis het person, you don't have to think about certain things if you don't want to, right? Like I don't have to think about whether or not there's going to be a bathroom that I can use safely at whatever venue I'm going to. I don't have to think about whether I can take my spouse's hand walking down the street and that's going to be safe, right?
Yeah.
And part of the reason that those part of the reason that society remains heterosexist and heteronormative is because cishet people don't think about those things. And I
Yeah.
think part of the reason that so many people get aggravated with the phases thing is they're being asked to think about things they've never had to think about before. And if the person who has asked them to think about that, one, if they actually are willing to do the work, and then that person grows again in their self understanding and something else changes, they're like, well, shit, what did I do all of this work for? Right. Like, I, as an example, someone in my life a few years ago, I don't want to, say any more than that because I don't believe in outing other people and it's up to them to tell their story. But a person in my life who's important to me said to me, hey, I identify as non-binary and I would appreciate it if you used they them pronouns and if we could, sort of tamp down some of the gendered language.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, absolutely, no problem. And this was a person that I had known for over a decade as female, and I was accustomed to using she, her pronouns with. And it took me a hot minute to get accustomed to they, them pronouns.
Yeah.
Like, no big deal, but it did take some time to get out of that habit and to just be mindful of it. And about the time where I got to where I was pretty pretty solidly in the groove of using they them pronouns to refer to this person, their self-understanding continued to evolve and decided that she was fine with she her pronouns instead of they them. And I could have said, well, shit, why did I do all of this work to get accustomed to they them pronouns and now we're right back to she her pronouns? Why
Yeah.
why did you have to go through this phase and make me do all of this work? That would have been one way of responding to it. The problem with responding to it that way, though, is that's all about me.
Yeah.
Instead, what, I said was, okay, I love you. I care about you. You prefer, or, your desired pronouns are she, her. I will go back to using she, her.
Yeah.
Um, and if tomorrow you call me up and you tell me that, your desired pronouns are they, them, he, it, a
Here.
problem, whatever, I'm happy to I will use a problem pronouns for you as long as you want me to. And it can change day to day because hey, guess what? Some humans change day to day. And
Not a bad
if
thing.
we if we approach this from the standpoint of this is a person that I love and care about, and I love them and care about them enough to respect their personhood, then yeah, I'm going to do the work because it's worth it.
Yeah.
And wouldn't I want somebody to do the work for me?
Yeah. So I've got folks in my life, whether through my parents or through other areas, right? And they know what I do. And so they ask me questions about their non-binary grandkid, whatever.
Mhm.
And they're like, well, how do they know? What if it's just a phase? And I'm like, the worst thing that's going to happen from you trying to respect who they are right now is them knowing you respect who they are right now and that you love them enough to try. So what if it's a phase? If it's a phase and they go back to what they were using, okay. If it's a phase and they go to something else, okay. The worst thing that they know is that you love them enough to try.
Mhm.
And we know statistically, and this is what I share with them, that young people, especially, who have one supportive adult in their life are less likely to try to take their own lives.
Mhm.
Be that supportive adult, please. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's the
And create
minimum.
more supportive adults, and
Yeah,
drag more supportive adults into their life, because the more they have, the better off they're going to be. And as you were talking about just a phase, sort of one of the things that I'm professionally trained to pay attention to words and language. And it occurs to me that the problem with saying that something is just a phase is the word just.
minimizes.
Right. And, you know, I was also thinking, if somebody says, well, what if it's just a phase? I think the correct answer there is, yeah, it is a phase. It might be a phase that lasts for the rest of their life. It might be a phase that lasts until Tuesday. Either way, it's their reality right now.
Yeah.
And if their reality and their understanding continues to evolve, so be it. But, you know, we're all in phases. And like, so one, let's stop minimizing it. And two, I think from now on, when somebody says, well, you know, what if it's just a phase? My response is going to be, it is a phase. It's not just a phase, but yes, it's a phase. And we're going to live with that and adjust to that phase.
And taking us back several episodes, can't remember which one, affirming the phase, being affirming of a phase, whatever it
Right.
is, in ourselves or in others right now. We're not minimizing. And even if we're like, well, we don't want to support it, but get over that. Support the person you love, support the person you care about. And even if it's not someone you're close to, don't minimize who they are. Don't
Mm-hmm.
minimize what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, because you wouldn't want someone to do it to you.
Mm-hmm. And even apart from, not wanting someone to do it to you, it's just a shitty way to treat people, right?
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, some famous guy said something about, do unto others as you would have them do to you. Eh, I think it was my boss. And, a lot of people call that the golden rule. And when I was doing my residency as a hospital chaplain, one of the instructors, he was a very experienced and incredibly wise man who'd been doing chaplaincy ministry for decades. I think he'd been a chaplain longer than I had been alive at that point. Um, One of the things that he lifted up for us as an ideal was, instead of the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, he encouraged us to internalize what he called the platinum rule, which is not treat others the way you want to be treated, it's treat others the way they want to be treated.
Inappropriate thought that makes a lot of room for kinks.
It does.
Sorry.
And but it's also a truly loving and caring way to deal
Yep.
with people, right?
Ultimately, yes, that's more important.
Another example of a phase that just occurred to me: imagine being the spouse or parent or child or loved one of someone, and so they're in a phase in their life, and you have a way of interacting with them, and they have a way of ordering and structuring their life, and then they go to the doctor and they get a cancer diagnosis. Well, guess what? You just moved into a new phase. and your way of interacting with and relating to and caring for that person and being in that person's life is going to change. And guess what? If they go through treatment and a year later they're in remission, now they're in another phase. And treating them while they are in treatment, relating to them, treating them the way that you treated them before they had a diagnosis would not be appropriate. And I think we can all recognize that. Like, oh, you just came back from chemotherapy and you feel like a walking advertisement for death, but I'm going to be really disappointed if you don't want to go to the park and throw the frisbee around with me. Right? That would be ridiculous and childish. Similarly, once they're in remission, continuing to treat them like they are, at death's door would also not be appropriate. Well, if we can make allowance for and we can adjust to those kinds of phases in someone's life, how is that any different from recognizing and responding appropriately to a new phase of self-understanding in someone's life?
Yeah. And phases, I like how you said that a new phase is self-understanding, because all of these phases that we're talking about are phases of self-understanding. And as communities, creating supportive spaces where people can live the fluidity of life without fear of judgment or expectation to change their mind, regardless of what the phase is important. And so maybe that cancer treat the person as they want to be treated. A cancer, like as a disabled person, I won't speak for cancer patients, but as a disabled person, I still want to be invited to the thing, even if you
Mhm.
know I can't go. Even if I know I can't go, it means a lot to me to be invited and included to go, to
Mhm.
have the option to go if I'm up for it, if I want to know that people are thinking about me, and to have the out, right? To have someone say, "Hey, if you're up for it, we'd love for you to come. You're invited. But if you're not up for it, maybe on this other day we can do a movie day or something you are up for, so that you still get to be a part of our community actively and engaged in the way that you have the spoons and energy for." Because we're talking about this idea of phases, and it's really important to note that this isn't just about LGBT.
Right.
This is about LGBT and disability and how we understand ourselves moment to moment. Maybe we get dropped a socioeconomic class or go up a socioeconomic class. Maybe we start a new job and it drastically changes things for us, or we go back to school and we need the support that we need. And our community, we need our actual community, the people who care about us and love us, to support us in that moment, whatever that support we need looks like. And maybe you can't offer the support I need, but maybe you can connect me to someone who can.
Right. And, it ultimately, this is about LGBTQ people. This is about disabled people. This is about human people, right?
Yeah.
Because as we've been talking about for a while now in this episode, phases are part of being a human. We change over time. Thank God. And, you know, I would really not want my parents to continue to relate to me now that I'm almost 52 years old, the same way they related to me when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. I'll tell you right now, if my parents still related to me at 52 the way they related to me at 16, I wouldn't have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And, you know, thankfully they don't. And, they recognize that I'm a grown adult and I have autonomy. And, it was kind of cool the day that I looked around and realized that my dad and I were friends all of a sudden. I'm like, you know, there was a time in my life I would have told you that was not a possibility.
That resonates deeply.
And it's a possibility now, and a blessed reality, because both of us are in a different phase.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have outlined, and you can see this, our viewers can't, is how do you handle relationships with people who loved an older version of you and are struggling to accept the current version? This is something that I struggle with, right? As in terms of my queerness, but also in terms of my disability, there are people with certain expectations of me that don't align with who I am now. No, I can't go on a hike. No, I really, really cannot tolerate you calling me she, her pronouns, and I refuse to. And so I've got people in my life who they want the little girl who is abled and who can do the things, or the young person who is abled and can do the things. And those aren't the things that I am right now. I am not a girl, and continuing to call me a girl or she, her pronouns, or using gendered language for me that is not appropriate for who I am right now is actively harmful. And so I choose to not have certain people in my life. And I
Mhm.
think of the social media person Elise Myers. If they're telling you you're too much, tell them to go find less. We can't do that with everybody. There are some folks that for whatever reason we have to be in a relationship with. We have to connect
Mhm.
with day to day for whatever reason. Maybe it's a boss, or someone you live with, etc. But we can set boundaries about what we allow for who we are in the moment. So I've set a very clear boundary with at least two people in my life that says if you cannot use the proper pronouns or put in a good faith effort to use the proper pronouns, I will not visit you.
Mhm.
I will not engage with you beyond bare minimum at certain functions where we are required to be in the same space. And
Mhm.
even doing that is too hard, is really hard, right? But I'm able or learning to be able to say who I am now is the me that matters right now, not
Mhm.
the me that you've idealized in your head. And to affirm me, I'm making it clear what they need to do to affirm who I am in this moment. And if they're not willing to do that, then I make the decision about what I'm willing to allow.
Mhm.
Um, so you saying like if your parents treated you now like they did when you were 16 years old, you wouldn't have a relationship with them.
Right.
That's that's something that carries for a lot of in a lot of ways. So people treat me now like I am the gender I was assigned at birth, and that's not acceptable.
Mhm.
Um, so I can tell them like, hey, this is how you can affirm me. This is how you can work to accept me, but that's your labor that I'm not willing to do
Right.
and I should not have to do.
Mhm.
Like that's the point I'm trying to get to is that
Yes.
that's a that's a them problem.
Mhm. And I think something that's really important, because like there's this thing of, going no contact, or uh, different levels of setting those kinds of boundaries has become very common. And there's a way to do that that is about setting healthy boundaries and protecting ourselves, and knowing our own value and our own worth. There's also a way of doing that that is just about avoidance. right? Like you can just suddenly cut off contact with somebody because you're avoiding having a hard conversation that might challenge you to look at some of your own stuff, right? The but the as you've described it, hey, I have said here's what I need for us to be in relationship. I need a certain baseline level of respect for who I am. And that means, using the correct pronouns, or at least making a good faith effort to use the correct pronouns. And that means relating to me as the person I am now, not as the idealized version of me that you have in your head, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a firm believer that we get to decide how we will and will not tolerate being treated. And when we set those boundaries out there and we make them clear, these are my expectations of how I will be treated and what I, sort of require as a bare minimum. And somebody sends the message very clearly that they're not going to do that. That's not a person I need to have in my life, and I think that is a very fair and valid boundary to set and decision to make. The not fair, not valid way of doing that, to my mind, because I think it's just emotionally not a healthy way of doing things, is to say, I'm upset with this person, but I haven't told them why. I haven't even told them that I'm upset. I'm just going to pull back and pull back and pull back and just not talk about it and then cut off contact and leave them wondering, it's the difference between setting a boundary and ghosting.
Yeah.
you know, and just ghosting somebody, just checking out and disappearing and not saying this is why, frankly, I think is just cruel. It's one of the cruelest things you can do to somebody because they're left not knowing, you know. And I think when people make a good faith effort to improve things, like you can take that as a good faith effort. But if somebody's not signaling any willingness to do the work, then yeah, it's perfectly fair to say, I'm just not going to tolerate being treated that way.
Yeah. And I want to make two additional points before we put it into practice. And that is one, you don't have to, quote, agree with
Mm-hmm.
someone to treat them with respect, to use their
Right.
pronouns. You
Mm-hmm.
don't you don't have to see me as I see me. I mean, that's ideal, but you don't have to use my
Mm-hmm.
pronouns. You just have to frickin' try.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point is we don't need perfection. We need you to try.
Good faith effort.
Good faith effort.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way to half-ass a good faith effort, and that's not a good faith effort anymore.
Right. And, I think it's, you don't have to agree with somebody to respect somebody.
Yeah, and you
Right.
don't have to earn like basic human respect.
Right. And, and that sort of baseline level of respect that people, I believe, are entitled to simply by virtue of being a human person.
Yeah,
Um, you know, I have a semi-distant family member, an aunt, who we don't agree about almost anything, right? We're just very, very different people. And there's probably like three things in the world that we agree on, one of them being that the sun rises in the east. Um, like that's about as much as we agree on. But I respect her as a human being, and therefore I treat her with basic common courtesy, right?
yeah,
And what's fascinating to me, like the question of pronouns, for instance, right? This has become such a hot button issue for the radical wrong. I mean, the radical right. That like you make a comment on something on social media, and somebody will reply with pronouns in bio, like as a way of discount, like You can discount anything this person says because they list their pronouns in their bio. Like, okay, if you don't think pronouns are important, let me call you, oh, cishet right wing person, by the pronouns that I choose for you instead of the pronouns that you choose for you. And, you start calling a hardcore right wing, cishet male she, her, you know, yeah, so this is Earl, and she thinks that, you start calling one of those guys she, her, and see how fast pronouns matter.
This actually reminds me of a question that we had submitted. Thank you for submitting it, even though we don't have a name attached. And the question, give me 1 second,
Hmm.
is it hypocritical for a person who does their best to actively practice respectful pronoun and name usage to feel reluctant to call the Department of Defense the Department of War? This is not a joke question. Like literal phrasing. They made sure we
Hmm.
know it's not a joke. And
Hmm.
right now, the Department of War is in a phase. And this is one case where that's not hypocritical, right? This is, there's a difference between navigating people and navigating systems and institutions.
Right.
And there, sometimes we do things out of protest, right?
Hmm.
So it's going to be the Department of Defense because being defensive is a lot different than being on the offense like war implies. It's going to be the Gulf of Mexico because the colonialism involved with the Gulf of America is some next level bull.
Right. And I mean, to take the Department of Defense, Department of War example, yes, we're talking about an institution, a government organization, not a human being. That's the first thing. Like, you're not going to hurt the Department of Defense's feelings if you don't call it the Department of War, or vice versa, because it's an institution. It doesn't have feelings. You're not actively doing harm to it. Let's put it that way. Because, saying that you're going to hurt its feelings, some people will view that as minimizing, and it's not my intent. You, you can't harm an institution by calling it by what it was called for almost 80 years, right? Historically, there's a reason that in the 1940s, after World War II, the US government went through a phase and said, we're going to change the name of this when we combine, because the Department of the Navy and the War Department, the Department of War, used to be two separate things, and they got merged together into the Department of Defense. And there was a very specific reason for that, because they wanted to send a message about how America viewed its role in the world, its place in the world, and how America viewed its identity as one of two superpowers in the world. There was a reason they chose that naming. And so to answer the question, I don't think it is disrespectful to or hypocritical to continue to call it the Department of Defense. And again, like, there's a difference between an entity or an institution or an organization and a human being.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like, I was in a conversation with some people recently about pronouns and how, you know, macho manly truck guys all have, almost always, if they have given their truck a name and their truck has a human person's name, like a personal name, the name is almost always female,
Same with
which is
boat.
which is really ironic given how many people will give their truck a female name and then hang fake testicles on the back end of it. Like, is your truck trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming? I'm just curious. But
There's a lot
again,
about
if
masculinities.
Right. So I used to drive a 72 Chevy pickup. It was almost this color orange. And when I bought it, I named it Lucille, right? And I would refer to it as she. And if my mother-in-law messed up and called it he, or called it by a different name than Lucille, that she, my mother-in-law could not in any way harm that truck,
Yeah.
um, mentally, emotionally, existentially by calling it, he or by a different name or whatever. You can do psychic harm to human beings by dead naming them, by misgendering them, by, all of these things. And here's the part that I think a lot of folks just cannot or will not actively refuse to wrap their heads around, that yes, dead naming someone, misgendering someone is actively doing harm, because what you are saying loud and clear is, I don't give a about who you are as a human being. I don't care enough about you to give you the bare minimum level of respect. And you can only say that to somebody so many times before it becomes harmful, particularly if it's somebody who you are supposed to love or who you claim to love. Um, you cannot claim to love someone and then turn around and regularly and routinely and willfully devalue their humanity. This is why, I think evangelical Christo-fascists who um, say that, they're not going to use all of these weird pronouns, and they're going to continue to call a person by the name that they were given when they were born, and blah blah blah.
What do they call God? Because they're going to be upset if I use she, her.
Mm-hmm. And
Sorry.
for those people to say that, they are making those choices to misgender someone, to dead name someone, and they're doing so because their faith tells them that transgender is a sin or whatever, or, you cannot misgender somebody or dead name somebody and claim to do it in the name of Jesus. I'm sorry. No, that's hypocritical. That's the definition of hypocrisy. That is straight up bullshit. Because, again, what did Jesus say were the two greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you're telling me that loving your neighbor as yourself means calling them a name they don't want to be called and using pronouns that they believe do not describe who they are, if you're telling me that that's how you want to be treated, man, you got some twisted ideas about love. You cannot treat people that way. You cannot actively disrespect somebody's basic and fundamental identity and humanity and claim to love them. That, to me, that's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm in real danger of preaching, so I'll reel it in.
Amen. And I ain't Christian. All right, sorry. Rock on. Today's Put It Into Practice is us asking you to answer the question, whether it be in a comment or a video or in a DM. What's a phase you've been through or are in right now that has shaped who you are or how you understand yourself to be? Was it any less real than who you are right now or who you were 10 years ago? Leave a comment, a stitch, a message to share. We'd love to hear from you. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or DM or in there's a Google form available. in on various ways on various platforms, and this is cross-posted. So in the bio or in gender disobedient or not heads bio, there's a Google form listed in our link trees. Please feel free to use that. That's where that question came from today. And we want to be able to hear you and listen to you and respond and make this podcast what you all need to build more affirming spaces in your lives and in your communities. Do you have anything you would like to leave?
Um, well, two things. One, with the put it into practice, even if you're not a person who's gonna like make a comment on social media or leave us a stitch or send us a message to that we can, weave into the podcast, fair enough. But I hope that, you'll do the work. I hope that you'll take the time to wrestle with those questions of, what is a phase that you have been in your life or that you're in right now that has shaped you, and to think through that in your own life, because it's so easy to like separate ourselves from other people. And part of the way that we, break down those walls and we bridge that gap between us and other human beings is by learning how to relate. And we may not have had the same experience, but if we can relate to a similar experience, like I don't have a PhD, I don't have a traumatic brain injury, and I am not non-binary, and like there are a lot of things where you and I are fundamentally different human beings, but we can relate because we're able to bridge that gap and say, oh, yeah, I've never been through a phase where I came to understand my gender identity differently, but I've certainly been in phases of my life where I have come to understand other parts of my identity differently. So the two things that I would end with, one is even if you're not going to leave us a comment or feedback on the podcast, I hope you'll wrestle with and chew on those questions for yourself. And the other, just to say again something that I think we've hinted at, but just to say it very clearly, whether who you are today is who you are 20 years from now or not, who you are today is as real as it gets. So yeah, it's a phase. It's not just a phase, but yeah, who you are right now is a phase, but that doesn't make it not real. So,
I would like to leave you all with the reminder that you are cared for and loved, and we see you as a valuable part of this community. Thank you so much for listening. Please, if you are able and willing, like, comment, and share, follow us so that you get notified when we do post new videos, which is weekly on Mondays at noon for new episodes and across the week at various times for clips. We are grateful you are here. We are grateful you are joining us in this phase of our lives on the podcast, because what a beautiful
absolutely.
phase it is.
Yep. And I hope that in whatever phase of life you are in, I hope that you will know that you matter to us. We do this because we love people, and we love those of you who have formed a community around this podcast very much. And whether this is the 11th episode you've listened to or the first episode you've listened to, I hope you will remember that you are indeed deeply and profoundly loved.
See you next time on the Affirming Practice Podcast. Bye.